This podcast is brought to you by JMC Academy, Australia's leading creative education provider. With degrees in film, acting, entertainment management, design, music, audio engineering, animation, and game design, JMC has a course for every type of creative. Search JMC Academy to learn more. Marc Fennell is a Walkley award-winning journalist and documentary maker. He is the creative mind behind the award-winning TV series and podcast Stuff the British Stole, now in its second season, and the host of SBS TV's Mastermind. He's also created documentaries about the school that tried to end racism, the rise and fall of Hillsong's The Megachurch, and one of the biggest and strangest art heists in Australian criminal history. He is a multi-talented, multi-platform storyteller. I actually don't know if I can think of anyone who can host a game show and then do a Louis Theroux-style walkthrough of someone's house and then hold their own equally during chats with a politician and a musician and a footy coach, all while having a deep knowledge of what each crew member on set needs to think about, from filming to directing to editing. And that's probably why he's received numerous accolades, including a Canadian Screen Award and multiple Webby Honours. And beyond his media work, he's a co-founder of the not-for-profit advocacy group Media Diversity Australia, and with his wife Madeline is raising two very cute kids. Welcome, Marc Fennell.
Thank you. They're cute, but also jet-lagged at the moment, so they're like up in the middle of the night.
Yes, you've just come back from overseas, haven't you?
I have.
So this is where I wasn't going to get into this first, but I have this idea of you. Let's go to that you're a bit of a workaholic.
Yeah.
Is that why you have to schedule in these holidays with family?
I am a workaholic. I've always been a workaholic. Actually, so my first ever job in television, I was 18 years old, and it was the movie show on SBS. So, and basically what happened was David and Margaret, who people will know as being the host of the movie show, they announced they were leaving SBS to go to the ABC, and SBS ever so slightly panicked and went, we need to recast the show and get it on air before David and Margaret launched on the ABC. And they had this nationwide casting call, and they eventually kind of filled the main panel, but then I was working community radio, and I went in and I did a screen test, and I did this little segment on DVDs, and I did it for about 2 years, and that show was axed before I turned 21, and I remember just being like, oh shit, if I'm going to survive and have a living, I actually need at least more than one income stream at any one given moment. I think from that moment on, I've always had at least two or three jobs at any one given moment. Like I joke that like all TV presenters, they were not hugged enough as children. But I think at that point I'm like, oh shit, if I'm going to survive, I need to chuck a lot of shit at the wall.
But where did this obsession with working come from? And also, where did this obsession with creating and covering culture come from? Who inspired you as a kid? Who nurtured that side of your personality? Where did it come from?
I was always obsessed with movies. So I went to how in high school people kind of move in cliques, right?
Yes.
And
the dancer girls, the footy guys,
right,
the emos.
So I went to a school that was just filled with music fans, like really obsessive music fans that knew particular genres inside and out. And it was actually quite tribal and a little bit impenetrable. So the thing that I was like, okay, so you guys are going to own music. Film was the thing that I ended up, and I became obsessed with film. I remember being at the end of like year 9, like the summer holidays, and I took one day to just go see every movie, not over 1 week, every movie that was nominated for an Oscar. And I knew, like at the age of, 14, 15, I'm like, whatever I do, I'm going to do something with filming. And I kind of just decided, I had no like clear plan of how it was going to happen, but I was like, that's where it starts. I was like, whatever it is, it's going to involve film. And so that became as my teenager point of difference to everyone else.
Because you felt ostracized from the music fans.
Ostracized, I'm probably making it sound more dramatic than it was. But it was like, when you're around like really hardcore music fans who are quite tribal and they're like, I know my one thing a lot. And you're like, I can't fake my way into this subculture. So I'm going to go find my own, which is sort of what I did.
So that's high school. I really would love to know step by step of how you got to where you are and what led to each step. So take us post high school. Then what happened?
I fucked up my university preferences. I had this plan, and so I got into a university that I didn't want to get into. And so I actually took a year off after school and I started volunteering at a then fledgling radio station called FBI. So I started volunteering at FBI before it launched, like actually broadcasting. And I walked in and I was like, I can do graphic design, also I can review movies, because in high school, the AFI run a young film critics competition. And I'm half Singaporean, so I have what I like to call Asian work ethic. And so I entered 3 times because there wasn't a limit on how many times you could enter. So I won an award from the AFI, and I actually remember emailing them going, does this mean I can say I have an AFI award? Which is the precursor to the actors. And they're like, absolutely not. Do not say that. So I went into FBI and said, hey, I can do graphic design work because I've been designing websites since I was a kid. Also, I can review movies. And I did some graphic design, and they looked at me blankly and went, no, you're very bad at that. Don't do that. Let's teach you radio. And so they taught me radio from scratch. I walked in there as a 17-year-old, and they taught me radio from scratch. And there's lessons I learned from that place that I still carry with me now. Like one of the most important lessons that I learned at FBI, airtime is a privilege, not a right. Every second you take of a listener's time, you have to earn it. Don't ever waste the listener's time. And I apply that on everything I do now. Like it's on you to hook the audience through every second of your content. And that was all stuff that was like drilled into us in radio.
How much did that prepare you for the current attention economy? Like literally, like when you think of you joining TikTok not that long ago, you were already thinking, I've got 2 seconds to draw people in.
It's interesting because the film reviews I used to do for FBI and then for Triple J, they were shoved in between tracks. And I always remember thinking, nobody wants this. Do you know what I mean? So, and I think that's a really good thing, right? So you tune into Triple J at the time, you're tuning in to listen to DMAs. You're not tuning in to listen to me. I'm foisted upon you between tracks. So it's on me to not make you turn off. So I would put 90% of my thoughts to the opening line, because in that moment, you will decide, am I going to stay listening to Triple J, or am I going to fuck off to Nova or wherever it is, right? So I think it's a good, in addition to like airtime being a privilege, not a right, it's also a really good thing to go, nobody actually wants your content. It's a good starting position just in general, to start from the position of nobody actually wants what you're doing. It's on you to hook them.
You have to earn it.
I think so. Like, I think that's a good, it sounds really negative, but I actually think it's a good way of approaching all media. People don't necessarily want your stuff. If you operate with that as a starting position, you're working extra hard to justify their time, their attention. You know, a lot of what I build mysteries. Stuff the British Style is first and foremost a mystery show. You know, really paying attention to your setups and your payoffs. What are you hooking people with? And then do you actually deliver? If you don't deliver, you need to, change what your hook is at the beginning so people aren't leaving disappointed. Always thinking about, what's the person sitting on the couch? What's the person in front of their laptop? How are they experiencing this? And always running every decision from story selection, the shot selection, genre, right through to like sound mixing grade, like running every decision through how is the audience experiencing this. And I think that really gets drilled into you in radio, and you can take those lessons and apply them to other mediums.
I want to go into Stuff the British Style because I know that you started pitching it pre-pandemic and everything. When did you become that movie guy on Triple J, and then what was the next step?
Okay, so after I'd done FBI, I got a call from a producer at SBS, and I didn't really know why I was having this meeting with her. And then the next day, David and Margaret announced they're leaving, and she's like, you should send in an application to be part of this show. And I'm like, why? She's like, oh, they're going to do the show without David and Margaret. And I'm like, I remember thinking, no one's going to watch that show without David and Margaret. In 2 years' time, I was proven right. But at the same time, I'd started doing a spot for free on Triple J on Super Request, which was like their nighttime show. And I realized like I never actually had a career plan beyond just wanting to be the film critic for Triple J. I was like, that was all I wanted to be as a teenager. I was like, I just want to be the film critic for Triple J. And then when I got there, I was like, this is great. Let me tell you, it does not pay enough to live. Like it's fun to watch movies for a living, but it is not a livable wage. So I think, I remember hitting a point where I'm like,
how much was it out of curiosity?
To do to do the review was about, I think it was about 1 day's work, right? But the way they managed to actually keep me on staff was I cut all their podcasts. So I cut John Safran's podcast. I cut the bits from The Drive Show, The Breakfast Show. That was actually how they managed to turn it into a job. But that job is boring. So I hit a point where I was like, I'm just going to try a bunch of stuff. So I agreed to do a Melbourne Comedy Festival show with my friend Dan Illick. I went out and tried to get a book deal. There was a project. The ABC was running a project run by Andrew Denton for a bunch of young people to come make a TV show, and I voiced the promo for it on Triple J, and I was like, "Fuck this! I'm going to enter that thing too." So
Did you voice it really shittily? There's this thing.
You guys shouldn't apply for this.
Guy, Andy, someone, I don't know. Don't apply for it.
So that was one of those occasions where I'm just going to try a bunch of things and see. Most of them won't work. I then found myself in this weird position where I was doing a Melbourne Comedy Festival show. I did get a book deal, and then I'd agreed to do this TV show at the same time. So I was like, this was not in the plan. One of these was supposed to work.
It all came off.
Yeah, which doesn't happen and hasn't happened since. And that TV show eventually turned into something called Hungry Beast, which was a really unusual experiment where the idea, this is about 2009, the idea was that Andrew had given up this plum job called Enough Rope, which was like one of the most watched interview shows. And the ABC gave us this incredible time slot. It was right after Spicks and Specs, huge audience. And they were handing it over to a bunch of young people that really, like I'd done like 2-minute reviews on the movie show, but everyone else was kind of coming at it relatively new. So 19 of us from all over Australia. And the one direction Andrew gave us was tell me something I don't know. So he wanted, and it was such a weird experience because some of us were making, serious, serious journalism. Some of us were doing sketches. Some of us were doing just weird stuff. And somehow they stuck it together as a show. And I remember when we were working on it, just being like, this is such a weird show. And the audience response was generally confusion, to be honest with you. But that group of people then went on to make The Feed, You Can't Ask That, The Checkout, Stuff the British Stole. Like, it did exactly what it was meant to do, which was create this next generation of Australian media makers. But it was the weirdest career experience because we're basically 19 of us, even we're all still really good friends, but it was sort of competing for half an hour of time slot. But also slightly competing for like Andrew's love. Because, Andrew's
kind of like SNL and Porn. Yeah.
That's the only comparison I've ever come across that makes sense. And Andrew is an amazing brain, like he's a remarkable brain, but you do want him to be, at the time, as somebody in my early 20s, I wanted him to be my TV fairy godfather, which is a lot, to be fair to him, is a lot of pressure on him. All of these people looking up to you being like, make my dreams come true. And I think for him, I can only imagine, and we've talked about it since, I can only imagine how complicated it was for him. It certainly was complicated for me, but it was, the group of friends I made out of that show, I still work with them today. So, Nick Hayden was an editor on that show, and then he became one of the hosts of the show, and then he went on to become the executive producer of The Feed, and then he went on to become head of entertainment at the ABC. Like, it was an amazing... It's ridiculous. It was an absolutely amazing, life-changing experience.
And then what? So did the life-changing experience with Andrew Denton? Okay, that gets axed. Another dream folded. And then what? So I imagine at that time you're already working on a few other things. Fingers are in a few pies.
Well, I think at that point when it ended, I started doing movie reviews for Channel 10 for their morning shows. But actually, and I started doing a radio show for the ABC, but actually the big thing that happened after that was that SBS, who I'd started my TV career with, they were like, we're launching a new channel called SBS2 and we need some kind of content on it to kind of keep it current. And so that's when they launched The Feed, which was originally like a 15-minute show at 7:30. Every night. And that's how it started. And then it sort of grew and grew and grew. And it was very Hungry Beast-esque. It's interesting. Hungry Beast, we used to say, was not a great TV show, but it was a great YouTube channel. And it was one of the first times that you could see things were actually doing better on YouTube than they were on TV, which had never really happened for us before. I remember we did a sketch, which is probably really dated now, about when Avatar came out, there was a criticism of it that it was basically just a bunch of other movies stuck together. So we made a sketch trailer about Avatar 2, which was just literally made out of like bits and pieces of other movies. Trust me, it was funnier than I'm describing it. But I remember it went above 2 or 3 million, and I was like, oh, well, that'll be the most watched thing I ever do. Cool. And I think it was the first time I'd had a good sense of like, internet is going to be more important than terrestrial television. The feed was the next evolution of that because it was on SBS. Its baseline audience was always going to be smaller, but we would start to get millions and millions and millions of views online for this show that barely anyone watched on television. And I was like, oh, and that's when I started doing interviews with famous people, because I could guarantee a movie studio or a record label 500,000 views like that. And that's how I found myself in this position where my main job was just traveling around the world talking to Jennifer Lawrence or Tom Cruise or, Hugh Jackman or, Al Gore. It was because of that. It was like this, it was a so-so TV show, but it was a great selection of social media clips. And that's where it was kind of, that really changed the history of the feed, I think.
You know what I find quite fascinating about you is that there seems to be this contentedness about you. Like, oh, this is my dream job at Triple J. This is great. Made it. Oh, 3 million views on this video. Amazing. That's the best I'll ever do.
I'm giving you the highlights reel, to be fair.
But when you talk about it that way, it's almost shocking to me because you must have grand aspirations. Like, look at all you've achieved. Look at all you continue to do. There must be a side of you that is always wanting to do more, strive more, be more. But then you have this insane contentedness.
It's very kind of you to frame it in those terms. It's actually the opposite. I'm just very discontented. So I can identify, because I'm a grown up, I can identify looking backwards like, oh, that worked. But actually in any given moment, I'm like, oh, wouldn't it be better if we did it like this? Or I want something big. I have a natural nervous energy, and I have a natural sort of, anxiousness about what comes next. And I also know that if you put all of your hopes and dreams on a singular project, it's a very dangerous thing to do to your mental health, right? If all my hopes and dreams are caught up in this one thing and it doesn't work, oftentimes it doesn't work because of something I can't control. The audience isn't interested in that idea, or there was a bigger show on that night, or, the algorithm was changed a week before. And so it didn't, whenever you can pour all this love and attention into a singular project or singular story, whatever it is, but you have to recognize that whether it works or not, yes, will in part be about you and how much effort you put into it, but it'll be a lot about things you can't control. So handing your self-esteem over to the universe is a dangerous thing to do. My solution to that has been to do lots of different things. So if a show or a project or a story or a podcast or a book doesn't work, yes, it's disappointing, but you have 2 or 3 things you're working on around it that you can apply your energy to and you can move on. I think it's really important because I remember in those years, particularly before the feed, where I'd pitched a bunch of stuff and I'd written a bunch of stuff and they just hadn't worked. And I was like the shittiest version of myself. I don't want to be a person for whom my self-esteem is at the mercy of a bunch of people and things I can't control. What I can control is trying a lot of different things. And so the way I work now is I am always in pre-production, production, and post-production at the same time. And I think it makes me better at my job because I can be, so I'll give you an example. When we were out filming season 2 of Stuff the British Style, I was in the Amazon, but at the same time, the color grades were coming in for The Mission, which is a series I did for SBS about this really weird art heist. And, I wasn't granularly involved in every aspect of the mission. Corin was managing it, but it would come in and I would look at the final grade and the final sound mix, and I'd be like, that's great. Wouldn't it have been cool if we'd done this, 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 and this? Oh, guess what? I'm filming another thing tomorrow and I can take some of those ideas from watching something at the end of the process and I can apply it into production. And, if you're in post-production on something while you're planning a new series, you'd be like, post-production is the inheritance. You've inherited all of your good and bad decisions. You can take the lessons from that and directly apply them tomorrow into how you're planning the next shoot. Right? So see how it sort of cross-pollinates? Everything becomes valuable then.
I love how you say you, meaning like anyone could do this. But Mark, you're the only one that is in front of the camera going, I can see the sizzle reel right now, and I can also see the post-production, and I know what the director's doing. And so my question is, obviously that's a superpower that you have, but does your team love or loathe that?
Well, I don't have I have multiple teams, right? So it possibly looks like I'm busier than I am, and in part because I've been very lucky to find multiple tribes, right? So the team I work with on Brits is different to the team I work with at SBS, is different to the BBC Studios team I work with on podcasts and stuff like that. So I'm not an island. I'm not doing everything. And I have a group of trusted people that I work with on different things.
But you could do everything, almost.
I can't operate a camera.
Okay. One thing.
I should learn. I should learn, but I can't operate a camera. First and foremost is to be respectful of other people's skill sets, right? So where it becomes challenging is if you're working with somebody. I find it post-production particularly challenging because I did cut my stuff for such a long time. I do know how to cut, and you really want to work with somebody who you just know is better than you. Because if you're working with somebody that isn't, it's frustrating for everybody. Because what I want to do, and I would never do this because it's super disrespectful. You don't want to sit there and go, can you just move 2 frames? 2 frames, yeah, great. 2 frames, a little bit back. I never, ever want to be that guy.
That backseat driver.
No. It's so disrespectful and I don't want to do it. The way to avoid it, though, is to hire somebody who is infinitely better than you, so you are never in that position. And that's tricky. So, and I've been lucky. I've found people that are just like so much better than me, it's not even worth, you don't even have to engage on but when you're in a position where suddenly you have to be like, that cut could move on the beat. If you're in a position where you have to ask those questions, it becomes tricky because I'm like, let me, and I would never do it. It's super disrespectful. But if you have the thought of like, can I just sit down and do it? Something's gone wrong at an earlier stage.
Well, you've got this core team now, but I want to go back to this discontentedness that you said that you owned up to and have, which I love that you did. And because I know you were pitching Stuff the British Stole pre-pandemic, and this is completely your idea.
Yes.
And it's also the biggest production that you've ever done, like
Yes.
11 countries. You literally shut down the River Nile in Egypt for your show.
To be fair, they shut it down of their own accord. We didn't ask for them to do that.
Okay, the River Nile got shut down for your show. It's huge. And obviously you have this discontentedness about it, but it is your biggest project. So therefore, how did you reckon with that discontentedness, knowing you've got these other stuff going on, but knowing this is the biggest thing you've ever done?
Well, it started really small. So, it was actually a running joke between me and my old TV co-host, Jan Fran. We were joking about how many things were stolen in museums. And then I happened to find myself in London at the tail end of 2019 for an award that I knew I was going to lose. So I was like, I have to make this worthwhile. And I ended up talking to this like rogue historian walking tour person. And I was like, are there many things that are actually stolen? And she sort of like laughed in my face. And she's like, and she just rattled off this list of like, that was stolen, that was stolen, that was stolen. That was a gift, but they were pointing a gun at him at the same time. So I don't know. And that list became the first series of the podcast, Stuff the British Stole. And at that point in London, I went around and I pitched it because in my mind, because I've been working with a lot of UK people on other stuff. And I remember saying to them, I went around and I pitched it to a whole bunch of different people in the UK. Because in my mind, it was like, this should be made by British people, right? It makes sense. I remember having this one meeting with a major British broadcasting group.
It starts with B.
And I remember I was excited, it'd be interesting, like unusual look at history, da-da-da-da-da. And she just sort of looked at me blankly and went, yeah, but like, do we really steal that much stuff though? Like, is it that bad? I was like...
What response did you think you were going to get?
Well, I thought...
From the Brits?
No, thought that they would know their own history. And even now, I'm still, it's so at that point I sort of backed away into a hedge and I got on my plane and I started making it by myself. Then the ABC came on board. ABC has a relationship with CBC Canada. They came on board to promote the second series. And in my mind, I'd always known that it was visual. Like I could see pictures in my mind when we made the podcast. And so a few production companies came to me quite early on and were like, we think this should be a TV show. And I was like, I agree, go away. And I sat down and I wrote out what I thought the TV show should be. I'm very protective over Brits because there's a lot of different ways you can screw it up. Like you can be too aggressive or you could be too soft. And I think there's a line that it has to walk. And I have a lot of rules with Stuff the British Style. It's a mystery show first, a travel show second, a history show third. You are looking for a small object that is a doorway into a big world. So every object has to unveil a particular chapter of history. Otherwise, it's just about random shit in museums. And there is no room for worthy in Stuff the British Style. Nobody wants to be lectured about colonialism. Everybody loves the treasure hunt. Like there are rules in place about that show. And it's a half-hour show. And so you have not a very much airtime to tell very big stories. And so the rules are important. And, I think for me, the rules are what make it. And I spend a lot of my time just I actually spend a lot of my time just saying no. No to idea, not from other, obviously lots of ideas come from our, DOPs and people that work on the show. And those ideas are always welcome. But I have I have absolutely no compunctions about saying no to something from an external force if I think it isn't what the show is meant to be. And I can be quite picky about that, and because it's my baby. And I think there's a good way and a bad way of doing that. And you talk to any creator of any show, and they will often tell you a lot of their job as the creator of whether it's a television show or a podcast. A lot of your job as a creator is to protect the core idea. Because one of the things is it can be anything. Particularly, it's particularly noticeable in audio, where audio can be anything you want it to be because it's actually quite cheap to do. Television is expensive. But I worked with an American executive at Amazon a couple of years ago before I started making my first podcast. And he was this lovely guy. And he was like, you have to be able to describe your idea in 10 words or less. It's not public. I'm not going to commit to the accent. He's like, it's not a motto. It's not a tagline. It is a North Star, right? And he's like, you have to do that for you, because if you don't, you're going to find yourself in 3 months' time with a mountain of footage or a mountain of audio, and it can be anything, but you won't know the core of what you set out to do. Every project I do has a one-line North Star. Contested artifacts in museums reveal how the British Empire actually worked. I did a podcast for Audible many years ago about the race to breed the world's hottest chili. Turns out Australia, the UK, and the US has been at war for who can breed the world's hottest chili. But what I realized is all the men, and it is overwhelmingly men, shocker, all had really damaged, traumatic lives, and they were using the pain of super hot chilies to deal with their emotional pain. The race to breed the world's hottest chili reveals a world of men in pain. The key thing is the verb, reveals, unveils. Every project, you need to have this very clear idea. You got a bit of leeway on the exact word number, but it has to be a sentence, has to have a verb in the middle.
Could it be a question?
No.
It can't be a question.
No, I don't think it can be a question. No.
Why?
Because you have to, your series can answer a question, but the question has to be a mission. It has to have within it has to have a beginning, chewy premise, active, outcome, and because if it's a question, all you've got is a theme. You've got something that I don't know where I'm going. It has to, the defined sentence means you're going to land somewhere. And I think that's the distinction for those sorts of things.
That's so interesting. There are some documentary filmmakers that I've interviewed that go with the question because, and perhaps this is not necessarily the best way to do it, but they want the audience to answer that question themselves at the end.
I don't think those ideas are incompatible. I think I often say I used to say as a film critic, actually, like I start a conversation that the audience finishes. But that's different to telling a story. Look, it's interesting. Like my job is asking questions for a living, right? And so my job is to be professionally curious. But in order to get shows made, get shows commissioned, I need to be able to demonstrate to a network or Audible or somebody that it's going to go somewhere. I think there's too many projects out there that start with an intriguing idea and then sort of go nowhere. And don't get me wrong, I've done stories like that where I'm like, I've got a great one-line idea, but I don't know where I'm going to land it at the end. And you can always kind of tell. Like I listen to a lot of podcasts, obviously, and you can always like tell when they somewhere around. Let's say you got a 6-episode series. It's got a great one-line idea, and they promise you that it's going to land somewhere. And usually, you hit episode 3, and you can tell them moving the goalposts because they can't actually achieve what they set out at the beginning. So then they're moving the goalpost to be like, maybe it was the friends we made along the way that was the real mission. Like, and it happens all the time. I'm like, and the reason that happens is because they didn't have a sentence; they only had a question.
The mission needed to be a sentence.
Like, and the other thing is, journalists often think that the best story is one that the audience have never heard before. Like, it's an exclusive idea that no one's ever heard before. And sometimes those stories can be great. I actually tend to think the best stories are ones that people think they know, but actually, so you've got something for them to hook into. You've got an idea that people are aware of, like, stolen objects in museums or, people are aware that super hot chilies exist or whatever it is. The best ideas are the ones where people think they know what the story is, but then you show them something underneath that they didn't expect. Because then at least you're not doing the heavy lifting of introducing an idea to somebody, but you are value adding by showing them something they didn't know about it. I think those tend to perform better. Doesn't mean that other ideas are less valuable, but they do tend to perform better because you're giving the audience an access point.
That role of journalist with you, I find quite fascinating as well because
I'm a fake one.
No, you've got all these incredible interview subjects who are often quite media prepped when you think of the level of stuff. And then some have absolutely, this might be their first ever professional interview, being filmed or being recorded. Obviously, the role of a journalist is to get to the heart of the truth. And sometimes the truth cannot be something that the subject is ready to reveal or wants to reveal. It can be hurtful. Is there something that comes to your mind when I say that, when there's an interview subject that you have gotten to the heart of a truth and they have kind of admitted it and it's been quite jarring?
I do miss interviewing famous people for one particular reason. Exactly what you're saying, that usually they are very media prepped. And usually by the time you're on a media tour to Australia, you're fucking bored.
Yeah.
Right? Let's be honest with you. Like, you've been asked what attracted you to the role 11 million times. By the time you've made it down here, you've been asked it 11 million times. So I liked, when I did about 9 years of famous people interviews, and I do remember thinking, like, my goal, like my measurement for success when I did famous people interviews was 3 genuinely authentic moments that no 2 other people in the world could have had. That's it. Doesn't have to be revelatory, doesn't even have to be new, but it has to feel authentic. Do you remember the movie Almost Famous? Has anyone ever seen Almost Famous?
It's why I'm obsessed with Rolling Stone.
Yeah.
I'm the editor-in-chief of Rolling Stone because of that movie. Yeah.
So you remember, there's a scene, right, where Penny Lane asks the kid, how old are you? And he says, I'm 18. And then he says, I'm 16. And he says, I'm 14. And she looks at him and goes, the truth just sounds different. That's what I mean when I say I'm looking for 3 authentic moments. The truth just sounds different. And so my job when I was interviewing, and you and I both know that when you do these interviews, one of the biggest challenges is time, right? Because with movie stars, they give you these miniature windows. And actually, to a point, we ended up basically saying we won't do it unless we have at least 15 minutes and we own the room and we own the cameras. We didn't do the junket setups, which we could kind of do at that point. But it's still really limited. 15 minutes is a really short period of time. And so with all interviews, it comes down to time. Either you have time in the room in front of them to fish around and find something good, or you take a fuck ton of time beforehand to research them and know and learn something about them that you can jump to the interesting thing, right? And what I would always do is I would try and find old radio interviews with people like from NPR, particularly with Americans, because they usually weren't transcribed. They're usually a little bit early on in their career. They are being asked smart questions, but it also was an opportunity to kind of locate something that early on that hadn't been picked up on in a while. And it's also a good way of telling, if you locate something from that you can draw on, it's a pretty good way of telling them, tell me you've researched me without telling me you've researched me, you know?
Done my shit.
Yeah, and you're very, very good at it. But I do think one of the things that was really important was like, try and find a story that wasn't finished. So I think the one that stands out to me as a moment that I still wonder about, to be honest, was William Shatner, the Captain Kirk. And we were in Brisbane. He was doing one of those sci-fi conventions, and I can't remember how I brought it up, but one of his wives was an alcoholic, and when he married her, she convinced him that she was recovered and she was fine, and in the end, she ended up taking her own life. And I can't remember how we got onto it, but he remembered telling me this story about how on their wedding night, she came up to him, and obviously there's a lot of revelry around them. And she came up to him and she's like, look, I got through it and I didn't drink. It was amazing. And then eventually she took her own life. And I realized I made Captain Kirk cry.
Oh.
And I just felt so conflicted about it, because there's a part of me that goes, I understand. And he was so generous with me. And I don't really know why. He was very generous to go there and talk about this worst moment of his life.
Because I imagine you didn't bring it up. I imagine.
Look, I may have.
Naturally.
I probably knew what I wanted, but I didn't think I would get. And it happens.
But then you must have done it in a way that made him feel safe.
My thing is to change my body language. This is something I learned from cutting them, right? Because I think everybody that is on camera should be forced to edit themselves. So then you see all of your bad crutches, you see all of your, the things you do. I also didn't want to force an editor to watch my nonsense. I can fix this up. No one else has to see the bits I fucked up. But I realized after 9 years of editing my own interviews, I was like, I do a thing with people where my body language matches them. So
Psychology.
I'm not very tall, but I'm kind of wide, right? So if I'm with somebody who's, we're going to a small and intimate moment, I will shrink. I will start to get smaller and smaller and smaller in the chair. If they're very big, you start using more hands, you start mimicking their body language. And I realized that because I knew, we've always had great DOPs, cinematographers on the feed. I knew that if there was a great moment, they would punch in, they would get tight, they would create the intimate moment. So it was okay for me to make the room quiet and small and have pauses, because I knew if I did that, they would do that. And there's been all kinds of interesting moments like that. Like Jamie Lee Curtis is one of my favorite ones, because when she walked in the room, she had this like, who the fuck are you? Like, why am I fucking talking to you? Why did I have to walk into another room for you? Like, she was real like, oh, like, what's so big about you? And what was fun about it was I could see her starting from a starting position of like, who are you? And then she gradually, like, she sort of moved herself. She moved, I don't know what I did, but like we just sort of hit a moment where she's like, okay, you're not a complete dickhead. I'm like, little do you know. And I remember asking her, like, what are you most proud of? I think I said, what in your career are you most proud of? And she's like, it's not my career. It's getting sober. And she volunteered that. That's not me saying that. Like, that's not me leading the horse to water. She's like, you really want to know? I'm like, yeah, I want to know. So I think I do live for those moments. When I did it, I do live for those moments where our job is to create an environment where people feel safe to share a piece of themselves. It's a job to create an environment where they feel like they trust enough of what's going on around them that they are prepared to share. And look, what I do now is quite different. A lot of what I do now is it's building stories and crafting environments that have to, with lots of different talent, that fill out a bigger story. But there is a little part of me that does miss the purity of one-on-ones. Because they are amazing. When they work, they are incredible.
And you touched on it a little bit before, the power of silence, that power of the pause. I used to be so afraid of the pause, and I was like trying to fill that gap, but now I love it. I love the awkwardness. I love the tension. I love that what gold could possibly come from it. Do you have a moment where you've had a lengthy pause, this power of silence that's led to gold?
I use it a lot now. Like Brits, people love to fill silences, right? So that's why we do it, right? You sit there, you ask a question, you leave the space because the person on the other end will fill it with something. And there's been a few times, and I'm glad I probably learned more from celebrity interviewing that makes me a better journalist, which is not at all what the conventional thinking is. Like interviewing celebrities made me much better at doing what I do now, because you get to know, you have to deal with different personalities. And, I always used to say with celebrity interviews, it's like famous is a part of their story. It's not their entire story. The worst thing you can do with a famous person is treat them like a famous person. You treat them like a person, first and foremost. And the fame is a part of their story, but it's not who they are. It's a part of who they are. And I think learning to get comfortable, just giving empty space to a movie star or a musician and letting them find their words with the knowledge that you can clean it up afterwards, it's not live, makes it much easier to sit down with somebody who you have to do like a slightly prickly accountability interview with, because you can just sit there and go, yeah, so you didn't actually answer the question. I'm going to take you back. You said this. What does that mean? Like there's a moment in another a series I got coming out later in the year where I asked somebody like, and how rich would that have made you? And he's like, oh, I don't know. And I was just like, yes, you do. How much? I was like,
oh, I love that you said that. Like, yes, you do.
I don't, at the end of the day, whether it stays in the edit, I don't know. But I think it's okay to just create a bit of space in the room, because it's not live. Like, and that's the thing. Like, if I've done a lot of live TV, and it's a completely different art form. Even with Brits, there's a moment where I ask, sorry, I just contracted to Brits. Sorry, Stuff the British Style. There's a moment in Stuff the British Style where I ask two museum curators about why bodies on display, and we kept it on a 2-shot because you can see two of them. And it's one of my favorite, even though we've got these amazing shots throughout the series of like, pyramids and, cliff tops and stuff like that. It is actually one of my favorite shots because you've just got two people there who are good people that want to do the right thing, but they don't quite know how best to answer the question. And I can see it on their face, and you can see it on their face. And it's not like we didn't lengthen the moment out. That's the time that they took to answer the question. But you can see in that moment, they're grappling. And the entire museum industry is grappling, because most of these museums, almost all of them, have something dodgy in their collection, right?
And they're run by people who love art and appreciate art. And I know the moment you're talking about. Yeah. They struggled.
And it's like, yeah, people that work in museums and galleries did not do it for like fame and glory. They did it because they care about knowledge, right? And yet they've become the inheritors of these most brutal histories. And they are all trying to work out how they deal with that. And then this annoying guy comes along and asks, and actually credit to them for actually turning up and answering the questions, because a lot of them don't. British Museum don't. So I think it's, I love that moment, because in that moment you see an entire industry grappling on their faces. And that's why I think it's important. Silence can, in a show that like Brits is packed as a show, but in moments like that, you kind of see the entire story play out on two faces, and I think that's important.
And you've got, so Amazon MGM Studios, they picked up your podcast series, The Nut Job, right?
Yeah.
This is pretty good. So you have a lot of control over a lot of your projects that you do, really end to end. With this one, you've passed on the baton. It's no longer yours.
Yeah.
How do you feel?
Good. So there's a drama adaptation that's been optioned for Nut Jobs, which is about $10 million worth of nuts was stolen from the state of California. Spoiler alert, it was by the mob. And the great thing about stealing food is that the evidence is eaten. And they're really hard to track. And it was a great, really fun story. But one of the creators of Suits has optioned it, and I have no idea what they're doing with it. At the same time, Stuff the British Style is also looking at being adapted at the moment. And that one I do know more about. So, and Julie Felicia King, who's a fabulous writer who's worked on Sympathizer and a whole bunch of some of the best shows recently. She's led this writer's room, and it was my first time ever sitting in a writer's room. And Ben Chessel, who worked on Giri Haji and Doctor Who, is on board, and Wooden Horse, who's one of the production companies of the documentary series, is putting it together. And I must say that one, because I came up as a film critic, I understand story and but I've only ever made factual. So for me to sit in a room, I remember just having this moment, and it was a fabulous writer's room they'd put together. And I wasn't in for all of it. I was just in for a little bit to kind of, to just like, if they had questions about stolen artifacts, I'll be like, oh yeah, that one was stolen from that. I remember just realizing, you can just like write a thing and a person will say it. You don't need to go out and find a person that actually thinks that and then travel to where they are and interview them and put it on. I was like, drama.
Says the man who studied all the Oscar-winning films in high school.
I was like, I'm such an idiot. I was like, that's cool. But look, I know whatever Anshuli puts together is going to be incredible. But that work is ongoing. But I'm not running it. It's her show to lead. And I remember saying that to her early on. We had a conversation. I was like, look, Stuff the British Stole, the podcast, Stuff the British Stole, the factual show. I'm the showrunner, which is a term that is not often used in factual television, but my job in my contract is I am showrunner. There is a line in the sand now. This drama, it is yours. I will always be here to answer any questions and thoughts and ideas, and I'll always be here to be your cheerleader. But what happens next, it's yours. And I think that was really important for her and for me, because I am a control freak. I need to know, like on Brits, I'm there from idea conception to color grade and sound mix. I think it was important for that because I trust her to make something awesome. And I'm excited to see what awesomeness comes from that. But I think having a clear demarcation is good. And I'm super happy to see what comes up next. I have a lot of faith in Wooden Horse. They've made, fabulous shows like The Clearing and Mother and Son. But for me, it was important to like just put a line in there. And I also, and it's also just intriguing. I don't agree to do things unless I'm going to learn something from it. Like in any project, whether it's a podcast, a documentary, a book, I'm like, I don't agree to it unless I think I'm going to learn something from it. Because what's the point of having a career if you don't grow, if you don't acquire new knowledge? That's what I mean when I say your job is to be professionally curious, right? So I think for me, what I'm most excited about is obviously seeing what they're going to make, but also seeing how they're going to make it. Because I've grown up, I was a film critic for 15 years. To actually have a front row seat to seeing how something like that is made, I'm not going to lie, is super exciting for the 17-year-old film critic.
But also interesting for someone who just admitted they're a control freak. Do you like that you're a control freak?
I don't know that I have a choice in the matter.
Everyone has a choice, Mark.
No, I mean, I think, so different projects, I take a different position in different projects, right? So the documentaries I make for SBS, I'm the presenter and I'm a producer, but I'm not writing and directing on them. Doesn't mean I don't know them, inside and out. But what it means is I have next level trust in Corin Grant and the team. And I trust he's got a photographic memory, and I trust that he, and I can do and I just have to worry about my job and us as a team. Whereas Brits, I feel like I have to worry about everything. I have to worry about, how are we getting from A to B? Like we've got a team, like I've got a series producer and stuff like that. But I feel like the job of story and the televisionness of it ultimately is mine to be in charge of. Whereas the SBS docos, Corin has that. I am there to support and feed ideas and to do my job, which is to be the proxy. Being a TV host is being a proxy for the audience. That's your job.
So it's all about your level of investment, and that's what you are a control freak.
It's not that my investment is lower. It's actually that my trust is higher, right? So I'm as invested in every single thing I do, but my level of trust in Corin, there's other people working on the show, but Corin is the one that is the writer and director. My trust in him is absolute. So I don't have to worry. I worry about how we can make best use of me and make the best story possible. With Brits, I do trust the people that work with me, but ultimately they are putting their trust in me to put it all together or to hold the idea together. I did a series with BBC Studios for Audible that came out in March, which was called This Is Not a Game, which was a podcast series about the world's first internet conspiracy. And, I had a lot of trust in them to piece together the story, but ultimately it still needs my voice. And I did all the interviews. And so one of the things you have to ascertain early is I need to work out early on what level of trust I have in the production and where and how much I need to engage the control freak, right? And how much I can trust that I'm in safe hands. I'm about to start filming a new show in the next couple of weeks, and I just got off the phone from the series producer, and I'm like, what I'm doing in that conversation, I'm trying to gauge how much do I need to think in 360 terms, or how much can I trust that it's going to work? And it's really hard for me to work that out early on. It really is.
Especially because you're probably one of the only ones doing that in this space.
I don't know, actually. I don't. It's nice of you to say.
Name one. Go.
I don't know. Well, I don't know. I don't know how other people work. That's a genuine question. Like, I mean, my models for this kind of job are Andrew Denton. And Andrew was a really good example of a person that was utterly brilliant, but, could delegate some things and didn't delegate other things. And that was my model, but now I'm realizing I can do it different ways. And it really depends from project to project to project. And it's hard. Like with Mastermind, for example, we shoot 85 episodes a year. I shoot 5 of them a day for the first 2 months of the year.
So you start the year and you're just stuffed by
pretty
March.
much. Yeah, like and I do it, and it's quite funny because you shoot it and it's all done by March, and then it just plays out the rest of the year. And I get these text messages from people just being like, "Oh, this one is not very good." I'm like, I don't know. I shot that in February. I don't even.
And there were 4 others that day.
Yeah, there were 4 others that day. Whereas, if somebody texts me about Brits, I know every single frame of Stuff the British Style. So I have a lot of you have to decide early what. If you are a control freak by nature, you have to decide early how you want to employ that and create the right boundaries for it. It becomes challenging when you think you only need to apply this much effort or effort of control freakness, but actually in reality, you need much more or much less. It's a struggle for me, to be honest with you, because I want to manage everything, but actually it's not realistic. And also, sometimes there are people that are just straight up better at it than me.
Now I'm starting to understand why you don't have quite a loud, opinionated voice on social media. That was one of the things that I noticed about you, that's not present. And there's a lot of pros to say that, certain celebrities and certain personalities perhaps shouldn't. Perhaps that's not the role of a journalist. But I wondered why you do. Is it to remain brand safe? Is it because your opinion might change 3 days from now?
If I wanted to be brand safe, I wouldn't have made a show that pits me against the entire of the UK.
This is true. Are you still welcome back?
They let me back in all the time, to my great amazement. No, it's not about being brand safe. I don't have opinions on the line for a few reasons. Some of which is, quite frankly, I work for the ABC and SBS, and I'm a journalist, and you can't be out there spouting your opinions. So some of it's just that.
I've seen that work to the detriment of certain journalists, yes.
Yeah, it really does. And I absolutely have some very strong opinions about things that are going on in the world at the moment. But my job is to be able to walk into any room in the world, sit down with people with any opinion, and for them to not know what I think, and then for them to trust that I will be fair to them. That is my job, right? And so if you spout a lot of opinions about the world, as righteous as it may make you feel, as right and fair as it can be, what then happens is there's a whole bunch of people out there that if you walk into a room and people already know what you're going to say before you say it, you have very limited capacity to build empathy, compassion, rapport. And at the end of the day, my job is to be able to talk to anyone. And it's hard. There's a lot of things going on right now that I'd love to say a lot of things about. There really is. But if I say something about one issue, then it's like, well, you spoke about that, but you didn't talk about that. And obviously the other thing to be said is like, if you say anything online now, you essentially need to clear the day to moderate it. And I don't
and clear the week to research it before you say it.
exactly.
Yeah.
And it's not that I don't think that's a worthwhile thing to do. And there are people that I know that do it and do it spectacularly well. And I have nothing but respect for them that do it. But I also believe that my opinions aren't that interesting, right? And I can change the world. I can shift people's perspectives better by creating environments where I ask other people questions. The other thing that sort of happens is I was very opinionated online when I was younger. I realize I'm much more effective at shifting people's perspectives if I use my work to change, to show. It's not about changing people's minds. It's about showing them other perspectives, and then the audience make up their own mind. I am not an activist. I'm a journalist. So I think I realize that I'm much more effective at shaping the world when I ask questions than when I offer opinions. And that was, for somebody that started as a film critic who started off basically being paid for their snarky opinions, that's a pretty big change in opinion.
And it's about contributing to the conversation too, and platforming certain voices that perhaps didn't get heard before, but understanding that your role is not there to echo that voice or give one voice a louder voice than another.
I mean, you curate. No, you curate. I mean, the simple act of making a documentary or a podcast, you are curating. So you are influencing to that extent. But I'm much more interested in arranging other voices than I am in my own opinion, which is ridiculous given I just talked about myself for like an hour.
I knew you would be fascinating, and you really have been. I only have one more question for you, and then I think we've got some audience questions too. And it's around this bloodbath of a media sector that we're in at the moment. We've had hundreds of redundancies. Yeah. Stock prices are falling. I mean, TV show ratings are falling too. What do you think media is going to look like in the future? And then also the role of the journalist. What is that going to look like in 5 to 10 years?
I mean, it's pretty bad at the moment. Like there's no, I won't sugarcoat it. Don't need to. It's pretty bad. There's a big contraction. Obviously we know there's been a lot of people let go. Commissioning across the board for everything is way down. Even what the streamers and internationals are doing is pretty. They've shrunk down, and they're really leaning on very high profile talent to lead what they've got. And that's across drama and documentary and stuff like that. That's pretty. It's a retreat to sort of safeness and stardom, which is challenging for a range of reasons because it means there's less entree for people coming into the industry, but it cannot last forever. So we had a period about 10 years ago where there was just an absolute incredible, just like a commissioning spree of like, there was so much, we called it peak TV. There was so much drama being commissioned. There was so much factual being commissioned. Every company, for reasons I cannot explain, had a podcast unit. There was even a period where, like before Facebook changed the algorithm, video was doing like insane numbers on video.
Yeah. We were earning a lot from Facebook video, I remember.
Yeah, exactly. And there are still pockets of it. Obviously, TikTok is a really strong platform, but also it's strong in a way that is kind of complicated because it's not good for media organizations. It's great for personalities, right? So it's really good for it's great for individual people, individual small collectives to do things that consistently perform. If you're a bigger media organization, or even if you're a middle-sized media organization, I don't think it's as effective in a way that I think YouTube was. So good. So I think there's a lot of fragmentation that's happening in terms of our digital consumption. But for people and the reason I come back to media organizations is because they are the ones that employ people that you can live off, that you can pay your rent, therefore they are important, right? So I think if they are in trouble, then there is it has an effect on the wider ecosystem. So there'll obviously be some consolidation that happens at some C-suite level in New York that will all trickle down and affect all of our lives, right? So, there'll be we're seeing, big studios have sort of collected together, and there might be some people spinning off. All of that will, it sounds really removed from our life, but it does have a trickle-on effect. Ask anybody at Channel 10. So I think there's that. As for the contraction and the lack of commissioning is about financial instability with media organizations and an unaddressed issue with our advertising industry. What gives me hope is that our desire to consume content has never abated. We still want great stories. We still want great dramas. We still want great comedies. We still want, challenging documentaries. I just sat and read a whole bunch of audience notes that came out of the Sheffield Doc Festival. And it's interesting reading. It's like, what people want out of factual, at least in the UK and Europe. It's about, still a love of true crime. There's still a love of anything about health, because people are always terrified about their health. People, creative ways of approaching cost of living. Cost of living is like the least sexy term in the world. But if you can find a creative concept for like allaying or arming people with information about that, there's a huge desire for things around that. So, there are things that people are interested in that we'll watch, and the contraction won't last forever. I just don't know how long it'll take for it to change, because it's not about content makers. It's about basically media organizations that just spent too much money on commissioning everything. And I was really struck by when you actually look at the number of people that stream things. I'm probably not at liberty to say actual numbers, but the actual streaming numbers for a lot of shows that you think are massive hits are actually a lot lower than you think. Like when you actually, so famously, like the big streamers don't tell you their numbers, right? But they know and they talk about it. So when you actually hear, I was in the UK and I was hearing what success looks like on some of the streamers there is like.
So the bar is a bit low.
It's really low. But what I think is one of the amazing things about streamers, and I think something that everybody should learn from, is they create the impression of success. Like one of the things that the streamers have done really, really, really well is create and they do it well through social, which is they create the illusion of something being a cultural moment. I'm trying to do this without naming shows or platforms because I can't speak on their behalf, right? There's a whole bunch of shows that seem like massive hits because they're cultural phenomenons, because they talk about them and, they get posted about on social. But actually, when you talk to them about what the real numbers are, you're like, that would be a mid-level show on Channel 9 in real terms. And this
does that make you feel better?
It does, but it also makes me think we're not doing a good enough job of creating cultural moments out of our stuff. It tells me that the stuff we make in Australia, or the stuff that we say public broadcasters make, we need to do a better job of creating this aura of cultural moment around it. That's what it tells me.
Well, that just seems like Aussies versus Americans, and the Americans have this beautiful ability of giving you an elevator pitch in the first 30 seconds of meeting them about how wonderful they are. And an Aussie will say, yeah, I kind of sometimes dabble in, maybe with my mate Darren, we make moves. And it's like, I'm sorry, Baz Luhrmann, but
it's true. And I think, it's a hard thing. I've been thinking about it a lot because obviously I make stuff all around. I live in Australia, but I work all around the world, right? So, and I am part of particularly why I like working with Audible is that I get to work with different production partners. So Audible is where the bulk of my podcast stuff lives, but I get to work with BBC, I get to work with Sony, I get to work with all these different people, and I work with producers in America and the UK and Canada and da-da-da-da. And it's always really intriguing to realize just like by simply being an American or simply being a Brit, the barriers for you influencing all of culture are just lower. Like in Australia, we will air anything with a Brit or American, whether they're famous or not, particularly public broadcasters. It doesn't matter if they're actually famous or not. It's like, but we'll buy that stuff. It doesn't work in reverse. Like an Australian selling stuff into the UK or the US, unless you're already famous like a Margot Robbie or a Rebel Wilson, and you've done the hard, and credit to them, they've done the hard yards of building their fame in America. So that's not a slight on them at all, because nobody wants to slight Rebel Wilson at the moment. I'm like, and like, it's full credit to her. Like, she's done a really good and important thing. But like, it doesn't work in reverse. Whereas we will take anything from them, but it doesn't actually work in reverse. I remember when Netflix launched in Australia, I remember talking to one of the American executives, and it was their launch day, and they're all happy. And he said, the great thing about the Australian market is that you show no resistance to our content.
We're obsessed with their culture.
Yeah, but it's like I think he used a word. I'm trying to remember what it was like.
Oh, resistance. What an interesting choice.
Yeah,
of
like
words.
it's like this. He said something that's slightly inappropriate, but but
like we can release stuff that's crap and you'll lap it up, basically.
It's just like we won't put up a fight. Like, we'll just take anything.
Well, we also see those countries as quite aspirational for some weird reason. But then you look at if we're talking about Netflix, you look at Heartbreak High. Obviously, they were here at JMC Academy not long ago being interviewed for the podcast. Like, it's such a great show and it's being exported globally. And we've got all eyes on this very Australian show that talks about essays.
It's one of my favorite things about Heartbreak. I mean, I'm an unashamed Heartbreak High fan. Like, I love it dearly. But one of my favorite things about what they've done with that show, and I think credit to Netflix Australia, because that show and Boy Swallows Universe, one of the things I love about Netflix's recent commissions is that they've gone hard on hyper-specific Australian, and they're sending that around the world, as opposed to what people outside of that ecosystem often do, which is they try and make something that's a bit global in nature. So it's it's Australian, but we've also got some people from other countries in there as well, because we think that's going to make us more palatable overseas. I really, and it does work, to be fair, for some shows. I think, and it has to for some shows. Whereas what I love about what Netflix has done with those two shows in particular is gone, this is who we are. Let's make it hyper specific, and people will buy into that in a way that Koreans have done, in a way that Brits have done. I mean, like, there are some shows out of the UK that are so hyper specifically about a particular. My favourite example is something. I'll say the UK and the British Isles, Dairy Girls. Dairy Girls is so specific about that particular part of Northern Ireland that I'm like, and yet it works. It works everywhere in the world. I think
I've never been there and I enjoy it so much.
Yeah, and I think there's a lesson in that, but it is rare, and it does take a big global platform to say. It does take a big global platform to say that we're going to take this thing and we're going to send it all around the world. No one else really does it, to be honest. Everyone else is like, let's make something that's a model together combination of some Brits and some Australians. And
accessible.
Accessible. Yeah. And it's challenging. It's really challenging. And there's no one size fits all answer to that, by the way. Like, what works for one show doesn't work for another. And it is a pretty complicated time in the business.
I feel like I've stolen you for a very long time away
right.
from the legends here at JMC. We do have a couple of audience questions. Who would like to ask one?
What, in your opinion, are the biggest challenges facing Australian documentarians in 2024? And do you have any ideas on how to minimize those challenges?
Okay, so your biggest challenges at the moment are who's going to play your stuff, right? So what you got at the moment is you've really got three places to play. You've got the ABC, SBS, and maybe Netflix. I say maybe Netflix because of the 1-4 documentary, and they did pick up the fabulous Harley and Cartier, which was an ABC commission, but then also went on to do on Netflix, and then won an international Emmy, and so really successful there. But your biggest challenge is, if you want an audience beyond festivals, you've got a real challenge with where is my stuff going to get played? Now, credit to the public broadcasters, and I'm not contractually bound to say this, but they do have venues within them both. So SBS has a thing called Australia Uncovered. The ABC recently announced a new stream where they're going to play standalone documentaries. But that's a lot of competition for, I would say, in the end, max 12 spots. And to get there, you want to be, these are, and I say this with love, these are risk-averse institutions, particularly the public broadcasters, right? So they, with their small spots, they're going to want something that they know will work for their audience. They'll do some risky stuff to win awards, but mostly they're sacrificing baby boomer land TV for a documentary. So they're going to be risk-averse, right? And that's challenging, right? Because there's lots of good stories out there that need to be told, that are part of our lives, that are not necessarily going to appeal to 61-year-old white people from suburbs, which is who's watching public broadcasters. And I keep that in mind because that's who I make my shows for, because I have to. I make it a show that hopefully speaks to people outside of that, but if I can't get baby boomers to tune in on that Monday, I'm fucked. So I have to make a show that works for them, but still talks to other people there, because I'm like, not that. So I think one of the challenges is there's like a long-term answer to that, and there's a short-term answer. The short-term answer is, if you can find an idea or a story that speaks to multiple generations at once, you're on a good starting position, right? So something that can kind of speak to multiple generations at once. Make something that you want to watch first and foremost, because you're going to be stuck with it for ages. And if you're doing a thing because like, I made this thing because I thought it's what my parents want to watch on TV, you're going to be like, fuck this. So make something that you want to watch, but also make something that you think you can get other generations interested as well, because that's going to put you in good stead. Partner with a production company that's already had something commissioned by those networks. Because you as an individual, even if you have the best team, even though in time you will absolutely go off and create your own production companies, you will, I guarantee you, at this stage right now, partner with somebody that's already had something commissioned by them. But just remember, you're going to be stuck with it for a while if you get it up. So make it something you want to do, but also, can I tell you what I do? This is going to sound super dumb. Anytime I have an idea that I think wants to go to the public broadcasters, I go to my mother-in-law and I'm like, what about this? And she's a really smart, engaged woman from Oatley, and I'm like, are you interested in this? And I just watch her face. She always says yes, because she's my mother-in-law, but you watch her face and you can see when her eyes glaze over. You're like, not sure. Maybe I'll just do it as a podcast. Maybe I'll do it as something else. Like I can that's how I do it. It may not be the most inspiring thing to tell you. The long-term answer is that they have to start thinking about people that are not baby boomers. They have to. Because as much as I love our baby boomers, they will not be around forever. And I think there's not enough investment from our public broadcasters in particular in everyone else, right? So the long-term answer is other generations come through, and then you'll be sitting here in a room being like, how do I make millennials care about shit? And the answer is asymmetrical haircuts and skinny jeans. So does that kind of help you in the short term, or is that a little bit not? You can tell me if it was a shit answer.
No, yeah, definitely. And get a mother-in-law.
Get a mother. You can rent them on Airtasker. They're great. But I think the more important thing, I can give you a lot of practical things. The more important thing is, don't ever make something that you wouldn't want to watch. Really, only make things that you would want to watch. Then let the natural process of television completely adulterate it, but start with something that you want to watch, because it's too hard. It's just too hard to spend all this time and energy on something that you wouldn't want to see. And at a certain point, you have to stand in a room and convince other people that this thing should exist. There's a reason, one of the things that commissioners, when they run out of things to say in meetings, always love to say, and they always run out of things to say, they're always like, why this, why now? You can tell because they've completely run out of salient questions at that point. And you should have an answer for that. Why does this need to exist? Why does it exist now? And then the next question will be, why should you be the one to do it? So always have that in the back of your mind, not just for their benefit, but for your benefit. Why am I doing this? Why is now the time to do it? Why should this exist? Is there something? And if you in that process of answering that question, you realize that there's something already else out there a bit too much like it, that's a red flag. Doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. It just means you have to rethink a little bit. So, yeah, make the thing you want to make, and then let them ruin it for you.
Can you tell us about the journey from the initial conceptualized idea of something to pitching it to a major media network, and how ready does something have to be, pitch ready?
Cool. Okay. I'm going to use Brits just because it's the simplest. There's been other things, but they've been in situations where I'm already part of a unit and it was like a process. So Brits is probably the best example of something that's come from the outside in, right? So Stuff the British Style began as an idea that I had. Whenever I have an idea for something, the first thing I do is I smash out half page of what I think it is. And when you're excited about an idea, that is the time to write it. Do not wait. Do not let it percolate. If you're excited, smash it out. In the case of Stuff the British Stole, or I don't know, another series with Sony in the US about a basement in the US that's filled with human skulls in the basement of a university in America. And I remember I was having a conversation with this retired priest. Don't ask, my job is weird. And he's like, oh yeah, there's a bunch of human skulls in the basement of the University of Pennsylvania. And I'm like, sorry, what? And he's like, yeah, they don't know what to do with them. I'm like, what? And I immediately got off the phone call from him and I started Googling it. I was like, and these skulls are from everywhere in the world. I'm like, this is incredible. So I immediately sat down and I smashed out a half page. At that point, I didn't know if it was going to be a TV show or a book or a podcast, whatever, TikTok series, whatever. I was like, I just need to get down the thing that excites me about this then. That's really important because you will get bored and you will forget what made you excited about. So the moment you're excited about something, write it down. I also have the memory of a sieve, which is the result of child rearing. I have no long or short-term or medium-term memory. So I just write everything down. Once you've got that, it's really important to work out why you're excited about it, work out why this, why now, why you, work that out in that moment. So, Stuff the British Style, House of Skulls, they all sort of started with that. And then I think the next question you want to ask is, who else makes things like this? Like, who else airs things like this? If it's got a Nazi in it, take it to SBS. Who else airs stuff like this? Because that kind of gives you the pathway to it. Now, I'm in a weird position because I've been around television for a long time, but I spent a good 20 years being told by television networks that I wasn't famous enough to host a show. In fact, right up until the school that tried to end racism, I literally sat in every meeting room with every remember, like, the feed was like on SBS 2, right? So I'd been pitching shows for years, but I'd sit in these meeting rooms at broadcasters and they'd be like, yeah, it's a good show, but like, you're not famous enough to do it. And that's 20 years of that, right? The thing that happened with Stuff the British Style is I made it as a podcast first. And one of the great advantages of that is there was no mystery as to what it would feel like. They knew the tone. They knew the arc of the stories. The good way to approach any media organization is think of all the no's they can give you and have an answer for every single one. Rather than like convince them of why something's worth doing, these are risk-averse organizations. So remove the no's. Remove the reasons for them to say no for something. Now, that could be anything depending on the project, but in those organizations, and it's true of all media organizations, it's not just the public broadcasters, they're all terrified for their jobs, right? But they also all want to be the one that brought the idea that rated 1 million or whatever it is. So really have a good long hard think about all the reasons why they would say no and why their boss would say no and why their colleague who's also got a show would say, oh, maybe we shouldn't do that. Maybe we should do my thing. Just think about all the no's and just think about what your answers to those no's are. But do that after you've done the why this, why now, why does it need to exist? Because you want to start on a positive. Like, why does this need to exist in the world? And then think about all the different reasons why a bunch of people could sit in a boring meeting room and say no, and just start to address those reasons. I think I used to have an approach with all media organizations where I thought I was really clever, where I'd go in and I'd work out what was the problem that they were trying to solve. Like, they've got a problem on Wednesday nights, or they don't have this kind of show or this kind of audience. And I'd try and come up with a story or an idea to solve their problem. And I just don't think it works. So maybe it works for other people, it doesn't work for me. And the thing that I ended up happening was I started working with a lot of Americans. And Americans have this amazing thing where they're just like, they froth on how excited you are as a creator. And I think Australia could benefit from a bit more of that. right? Like, let them get excited about your idea. Remove their nose and then watch them try and solve their own problems, right? So don't go into them with like, they've got a problem on Wednesday nights or anything like that. Know why it should exist. Be smart about the reasons they could say no. Let them get excited and then let them solve their own problems. Because it's three-dimensional fucking chess to try and solve their problems for them. I can't do it, and I've been doing it since I was a teenager. I wouldn't. And I think at that point, inevitably you're going to have to partner with people that they already know because risk averse. Everybody's risk averse. But just always remember that if it's something unique that you think should exist in the world, just always keep coming back to that. And I do think like having a North Star about what it is, like just being very clear about why this needs to exist is crucial. And then just keep doing it. Because, like there's an impression that's been created by this conversation that I make a million things and they all work. What you don't see is the folder in my Google Docs of all the things that, some of them are undercooked and shouldn't have existed. You don't see the thing that, reached this point and then somebody in LA said, it's great, I love it, we're going to replace you with a comedian. Like you don't see that. You don't see all the things that, and, like I only post about the things that work. I don't come out of meetings and go, went to a meeting and it didn't work. Just what people don't see is all the stuff that either hasn't worked or hasn't worked yet. So just keep doing it and do it again and try another time and just keep doing it. Like, don't be annoying. Like, don't pitch the same idea 50,000 times because they'll be like, not him. Well, he's a pain. We're not going to deal with him. But keep coming up with ideas and see. And, at this point, I feel compelled to say, like, listen to their feedback back about why it didn't work. Not once have I gotten anything useful back from any network when they said no to an idea. Because usually they're too busy just trying to like, that's not going to work. We do need this thing though. We need this other show with this other person who's got 4 other shows. Then I've yet to encounter a no that came with meaningful feedback. I'm sure other people get them, but I've never found a single network executive with a useful, like, constructive no note. I'm sure they exist. I just haven't met them yet. Does that help at all?
Yeah, it does.
Does it? Really? You can tell me if it doesn't.
That's such great advice. I mean, I'm going to listen back to this podcast and take notes.
Okay.
Honestly, I think
I need to find a basement with skulls and get a mother-in-law.
The list.
I love that. That's your takeaway.
Yeah, the shopping list I've given you out of this episode is fucking weird.
No,
so I promised I would swear less than I normally. I swear all the time, and I'm like in front of a mic, don't fucking swear.
Yeah, thank you very much.
We're all adults here.
I'm not.
What is your best advice for navigating the challenges of telling difficult and often controversial stories?
Not well. I think knowing your why, right? So I learned this actually from Jan Fran, my old co-host on the feed. She always said, she doesn't agree to something unless she knows why she's doing it. And it does get harder when people start bringing you ideas. Because it's like, I mentioned earlier that I spent a long time just being told no, like repeatedly being told no. And then when you reach a certain point where people are like, do you want this? Why don't I give you a job? And then you're like, am I saying yes to this because somebody's giving me a job? And I had to learn early on, like, I shouldn't agree to this unless I know why. And anytime I have agreed to something, just because somebody wants me, it always ends badly, like always ends badly. So to come to the core of your question, it is about knowing why you think something should be done. Because it is hard. Like Brits is hard. I shoot for months all around the world. Everyone got ill. I broke my ankle. I'm away from my kids. I'm dealing with traumatic history, culturally sensitive, sometimes in dangerous places, difficult places. We make it all look cinematic and pretty and like a big global adventure, but it's fucking hard to make, right? And you're dealing with traumatized communities who've had really bad experiences. You're dealing with an entire nation in the UK that doesn't want the show to exist. Museums and galleries absolutely stonewall us. I think we sometimes are guilty of making that show look easier than it actually is. It's hard. But it's important to come back to why should this exist? Why is it important? So television and podcasts, documentaries, it's all hard. And it should be. Really, it should be hard, because if it was easy, then everyone would do it, right? So sounds like I'm giving like one of those like, warning you off the industry kind of talks, but it's like, it should be tricky. It should be, that's not a reason to not do it though. Like if you know why something's worth doing, why you think it should exist, why you should be the one to do it, why it needs to be done now, then every time it's hard, you have something to go back to kind of provide a leveling off. That can be really difficult though when something doesn't work, right? So when you have a very clear reason why something exists and then it reaches an impasse where actually it's not doable, it can be very hard because you've now been like, this needs to exist, and for external reasons, it cannot. That's the flip side of the knowing your why. In terms of something, how you navigate it moment to moment, always remember to be human. In television and journalism, it's very easy. You'll never hear darker jokes. You'll never hear more like inappropriate things than when you're dealing with journalists, except maybe people that work in emergency services, because you kind of end up having what quite a dark sense of humor, because you're often dealing with dead bodies and awful things, right? Not that you're all going to do these kinds of stories, but it is a reality of some of the stuff. And I think remember to be human. The thing that makes you care about a story, the thing that makes you care about the people, the thing that makes you care about the issue matters. So if you lose it and you become like this TV producing automaton that has no feelings, you're actually losing your ability to kind of transmit the emotion to the audience. So it's okay to have feelings. It's okay for things to be overwhelming. It's okay for things to be hard, because that's the human component that AI hasn't yet managed to, completely circumvent. And it's also just hard to recognize when, defending your thing you care about becomes stubbornness. Like you've seen the internet meme, am I the arsehole? Like it actually can be quite hard, to be honest with you, to work out the line between I'm defending this thing or have I become pig-headed. At a certain point, it's really difficult. And it's also really difficult when you encounter other people that fervently believe that they are doing the right thing and they are also being an asshole, right? So you're often dealing with people who are in the similar sort of emotional predicament as you. And I think it's important to recognize that our industry works because humans tell stories to other humans, right? I'm not saying that AI and technology doesn't absolutely have a place in our industry moving forward. It does. But we respond to what we see because intuitively we know that a human told another human a story and a human behind a camera or a microphone captured it, and the truth just sounds different, right? So remember that and kind of acknowledge that all of the pain and suffering and joy and inappropriate shit that comes with humans being humans is a kind of a part of it and actually can never be extricated from it. And you kind of have to, give each other a bit of, give yourself and give each other a bit of leeway to be human and fallible in that process as well. That went a little bit more existential than I was intending, but here we are.
I think that's a really great place to end it, actually. Mark, I feel like I've learned so much from you. Remember to be human, figure out your why, have your North Star, have your statement, not your question, and maybe get a mother-in-law on Airtasker.
I can give you my mother-in-law's number.
I'm sure she would love that.
Currently cruising around the Europe, but she will be available in a couple of months.
Put her on Airtasker.
Yeah.
Get her up there. Mark, thank you so much. And thank you for being so generous with your time and being so honest as well about that you are human. Like I feel like there were some moments there where I just put you on this pedestal and you went, no, bring me back down to earth. Thank you. So thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you for having me. And thank you all for being here. I appreciate it.